Hey everybody. So I'm going to read the introduction to you from Understanding the Faith, which will look backwards to you because I flipped the camera. Anyway, doesn't really matter because you're following along in your book. So here we go. Introduction. And just so you know, first one's always the weirdest. How to figure out where you're going. Let's say you parachute into the middle of New York City's Central Park. When you land, a mysterious stranger says to you, "There's $5,000 diamond necklace waiting for you at Tiffany & Company. It's yours free on one condition. You have to claim it in the next 20 minutes. Ha ha ha! Even if you care nothing for diamond necklaces, this would get your attention. You could always sell it and keep the cash. But what is Tiffany & Company and how do I get there? You ask. I can't tell you, says your anonymous source. You'll have to find out on your own. Of course, you suspect a trick. After all, you just parachuted in. You know nothing about your would-be benefactor. But the necklace is worth a lot, so you have a strong incentive to check it out. Your heart begins pounding. You feel your smartphone must have fallen out during the jump. You've never been in New York City before. The time limit creates a sense of urgency. If you just wandered around for a few hours, you might eventually find Tiffany & Company, but you don't have hours. You have 20 minutes. If you want the necklace, you're going to have to overcome your fear and your embarrassment at dragging a parachute behind you and start asking for directions. You'll probably have 3 questions. Where am I? Where is Tiffany & Company? And what is the fastest way to get there? But what kind of person do you ask? It must be someone who knows New York City generally, and where certain stores are in particular. The homeless guy on the bench, may know the layout of New York City, but he doesn't seem like the kind of guy you would know much. Okay, that was just a really bad sentence. Let's try again. Ta-da! The homeless guy on the bench may know the layout of New York City, but he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who would know much about jewelry stores. The skateboarding teenager probably won't know either. Will the mom pushing the baby in a stroller? Let's say you find a source you think might be credible. How do you know he or she is telling the truth? After all, people in New York act as if they know what they're doing, but some of them must be just as lost as you. In fact, they might be wrong and not even know it. Or worse, your source may have a sick sense of humor and think it's funny to send you running off in the wrong direction. Will you ask more than one person to get confirmation? What do you do if their answers conflict? The middle of Central Park to Tiffany & Company on 5th Avenue on the southeast side of the park is less than a mile. You can easily make it there inside of 20 minutes, especially if you jog, but it will take a few minutes to get directions and to orient yourself. There's no time for mistakes. If you want the necklace, you'll have only one chance. Section 2, Getting Directions for Life. Some things about the search for the Tiffany & Company necklace are very much like real life. People who figure out what works in life are rewarded. The rewards may be tangible, like money or things, or intangible, like peace of mind, satisfaction with a job well done. The rewards may be temporal, meaning just in this life, or eternal, which means beyond death. Either way, there's a time limit. 1 out of every 1 person dies. You probably noticed. There is a real world with real rules. You can't set off to the north and expect to reach a southerly destination, except after a very long walk and swim around the earth. This book was written to aid you in your exploration for God. Is he real? What is he like? Is what the Bible says about him authoritative and worthy of obedience? Many people question whether this is a valid pursuit. Some think it is irrelevant whether God exists. Others see belief in God and the Bible as an anesthetic that exists only to help those who have a low tolerance for pain cope. Still others see God and the Bible as fictions invented to help the powerful oppress the weak. We should not be too quick to dismiss these assertions. There are undoubtedly people who claim to be Christians but live as if God is irrelevant. And we can easily imagine people embracing Christianity because they want a crutch to help them hobble through life, or a club with which to bully others. Skeptics, cynics, atheists, agnostics, and firm believers all have at least one thing in common. They don't know everything. Beyond general things such as how to walk without falling down, how to feed ourselves, and so on, we need help. Think of all the confusing issues humans face, and here are a few. Is there a God, and what do I understand to be true about him? How should I respond to those who believe differently, especially those whose understanding of God tells them to harm people like me? Where did we come from? Are we really a special creation of God, or are we the result of a random process of evolution? What does this mean for how we live together? What should I do for a job? What kinds of jobs are worth doing, and how can we create more jobs? What does God want from me? How can I even know? What if people who have a different view of him try to stop me from doing what he wants? Should I get married? What is marriage anyway? If two people of the same sex want to marry each other, is that truly marriage? How can I live in harmony with those around me? Which political and economic policies are most harmonious with human flourishing? How should we respond when bad decisions made by leaders create disharmony? It's tempting to dismiss these questions as trivial, but they matter. In the end, we have to act on what we know, and all our questions and actions will lead us to some destination. You might say, I refuse to think about this. I'm not going anywhere. But you actually are. In this case, nowhere is surely as much a destination as somewhere. All these questions about direction in life matter because we humans are not mere animals. We need to make sense of the world, not just survive in it. Among all living creatures, only human beings seem to wrestle with why we exist. In A World Without Heroes, that's a book, George Roche said, "Man is a very strange animal. Not that there is anything particularly queer about our physical equipment. This is all quite reasonable. But gorillas have hands as we do, yet use them for very little, and never to play the piano or skip stones or whittle or write letters. Dolphins have bigger brains than we do, but you seldom hear them discoursing on nuclear physics. Chihuahuas are more hairless than we, but have never thought to wear clothes. Man alone weeps for cause and is shaken with the beautiful madness called laughter. The products of our musings and mental processing are called ideas, and our lives are full of them. Some ideas accurately reflect our world. Many do not. Some help us. Others cause harm Are there clues we can use to figure out the difference? Section 3. Is one direction better than another? Alice was completely overwhelmed by Wonderland and at an absolute loss for where to go. She asked the Cheshire Cat, "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to walk from here?" "That depends a good deal on where you want to go to," said the cat. "I don't much care where," said Alice. "Then it doesn't matter which way you walk," said the cat. "So long as I get somewhere," Alice added as an explanation. "Oh, you're sure to do that," said the cat, "if you only walk long enough." The dialogue between Alice and the cat is more profound than it might appear. Even if we don't care enough to think deeply about truth and meaning, our ideas lead us somewhere. Of that we can be certain. But where do they lead? Our culture floods our senses with ideas, advertisements, programming, conversations, text messages. All this noise can seem like random, neutral bits of information, but if we look more closely, we realize that every bit of information contains proposals about how the world works. The ideas communicated might be true or false, but they are not neutral. They have the power, for better or worse, to change how we see the world. Over time, patterns emerge that hold certain ideas together and conform our lives to values and ways of living. The ideas we encounter may be complex, but they are not random. We are influenced, even if only with tiny nudges, by this information. The average person makes a few big decisions every day. Should I study for this test? and 10,000 to 20,000 small ones. Should I eat the chips first or the sandwich? Taken together, that which influences our decisions affects the way we live and possibly even the direction of our lives. Overwhelmed, many tune out and believe whatever they're told. History tells how unthinking people became the victims of ideas. A characteristic of those in the rising generation, however, is their dissatisfaction with the "that's just the way it is, so stop asking" questions. Approach to tough questions. They crave meaning and know they must go beyond seeing the world in bits and pieces, as Francis Schaeffer put it, to seeing the big picture. What we need is a map. Maps provide clear mental models of the terrain we must navigate. A good map shows where the various towns, roads, and landmarks are situated in relation to one another. An ideas map would describe the contours of the world of thought and help us navigate the information we encounter. The more accurate our map, the more we'll understand. On the map of life, there are 5 major landmarks. 5 questions we must ask and answer whether we want to or not. Section 4, the 5 questions affecting our directions in life. Obviously, mastering the world of ideas is a complex undertaking. I think of this every time I visit the Bodleian, we're going with Bodleian, University at the, the Bodleian Library at the University of Oxford. The Bod is one of the world's greatest libraries and the repository of more than 11 million books and artifacts. As you imagine, Oxford's majestic spires recall the Apostle Paul's statement, "Take every thought captive to obey Christ." How many thoughts are in all those books? How could a person possibly master them all? Thoughtful people have always felt overwhelmed by how much there is to know. Even King Solomon said, "Of making many books there is no end." Think how many more books have been written in the centuries and millennia since he said that. Today, the world of ideas is more complex than ever. Which ideas should we take seriously? Which should we dismiss as frivolous, incoherent, or patently ridiculous? And which should we actively oppose as dangerous? Maybe it will help to identify 5 landmarks on the idea map that form 5 questions every human must grapple with. First question is of origin. Where did we come from? Some say we were created by God to bear his image. Others say we evolved through random chance processes. One American Indian creation story begins with the woman and the man dream that God was dreaming them. So were they already created in dreaming, or were they part of God's dream? Is the story intended to be taken literally, or is it poetry? The various creation stories contradict one another. They can't be all right, but which is wrong? Identity. Who are we? What is a human being? Are we more than just animals? Does every human being have intrinsic worth and dignity? Or are worth and dignity determined by external factors, skills, and attributes? Further, most people suspect that something is wrong with us. What exactly, if anything, is wrong, and how do we fix it? Then there's meaning. What is real and true, and how do you know? What is life all about? Is there purpose to our lives, or must we contrive it somehow? Is reality real or an illusion? Is there such a thing as the good life? And if so, what is it? What makes life worth living at all? Why do humans not only exist, but also wonder about why they exist? Will the answers we embrace determine what we ultimately live for and the lengths to which we should go to achieve it? And then there's morality. How should we live? Are there rules for the good life? Who makes them? Are they true for all times and all cultures, or do they depend on your circumstances? A study by Barna Group states that 83% of young adults said moral truth depends on the circumstances, and only 6% said moral truth is absolute. Is morality based on feelings? Does morality change if feelings change? Lastly, there's destiny. What happens next? Where is history headed? Is there an afterlife? If so, what's it like? Clearly, there is something wrong with the world, Poverty, injustice, pain, and sickness exist. How do we explain this? And what do we do about it? Some say that bad things are just an illusion, while others say that bad things result from evolution and have no larger meaning. Still others blame sin. Some say there is a possibility of redemption, but there are many different ideas about what that means. Should we try to fix things or merely look forward to a life beyond this one? And just when we think we've got everything figured out, one question continues to haunt us all. How do we know that our answers to these questions are right? Section 5. Why we must understand the times. The Bible tells of a tribe in ancient Israel called Issachar, whose men had an understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. That's in 1 Chronicles. Those who understand the times aren't as likely to be tricked by wrong ideas. What's more, because they understand reality more clearly, they can come up with solutions to the problems that plague us all. The Old Testament often uses the Hebrew word derek to describe a direction-filled life. Derek means the way. According to seminary professor Joel Williams, the ancient Hebrews thought to walk in the ways of God meant to live according to his will and commandments. Deuteronomy 10:12 says that we should walk in all his ways. Isaiah 43 says to prepare the way of the Lord. In life, there is a right way to go and a wrong way to go. There is a way of wisdom and a way of foolishness. There is a right way and a wicked way. There is a way of life and a way of death. If you can understand the right way, the wrong way will become evident. If you can know how to stay on the right way, you can discern when you and others deviate from the path. The Apostle Paul, for example, in his lengthy and complex letter to the Christians in Rome, begins with a summary of how humanity had lost its way. He said in Romans 1, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened." In this passage, Paul describes what happens when people reject God. As a friend of mine puts it, when people do not think well of God in their minds, God gives them minds that do not think well. Although it might sound broad-minded to argue that we should invite everyone to live as he or she pleases, the world does not change to fit our whims and desires. If Christianity is true, then it accurately describes the world as it actually is. Rejecting Christianity, then, is the same as rejecting reality itself. Inevitably, the real world crashes in, revealing the consequences of rejecting God's rules and patterns. For more than 15 years, British physician and psychiatrist Theodore Dalrymple, that's a fun name, cared for the poorest of the poor in London's slums. He observed in the process that the government's attempts to show compassion to the poor actually worsened their situations. Drunkenness, promiscuity, gluttony, and abuse were common, along with all the health consequences you might expect from such lifestyles. As Dalrymple tried to heal people's wounds, he asked, "Why do you live like this?" Stunningly, he concluded that these vulnerable individuals had simply embraced and practiced the ideas about gender, sexual liberation, and meaning that were taught in theories at top universities and in the media. In his book, Life at the Bottom, Dalrymple turns his acerbic wit on 20th century intellectuals who sought to free our sexual relations of all social, contractual, or moral obligations and meaning whatsoever, so that henceforth only raw sexual desire itself would count in our decision-making. Dalrymple shows that the results of adopting these ideas, both literally and wholesale, are horrifying. This is what he says. If anyone wants to see what sexual relations are like, freed of contractual and social obligations, let him look at the chaos of the personal lives of members of the underclass. Here are abortions procured by abdominal kung fu, children who have children in numbers unknown before the advent of chemical contraception and sex education, women abandoned by the father of their child a month before or a month after delivery. We're going to go with insensate, that's a hard word to say. Insensate jealousy, the reverse of the coin of general promiscuity that results in the most hideous oppression and violence. Serial stepfatherhood that leads to sexual and physical abuse of children on a mass scale, and every kind of loosening of the distinction between the sexually permissible and the impermissible. After reading Dalrymple's graphic portrayal of the consequences of creating our own moral standards, we need to reevaluate the wisdom of the world in light of the wisdom of God. We need to rediscover the differences between right and wrong, good and evil. 6. Can we know the right way? Can we know anything at all? When people make up worldviews, they tend to make up ones they believe they can successfully live out. The Christian worldview is not like that. Scripture reveals a God who does not change the rules and patterns of reality just because people do not like them. He does not adjust right or wrong according to the actions and philosophies of any particular community. As essayist Flannery O'Connor said, truth does not change by our ability to stomach it emotionally. Conversely, God does not consider something to be true just because people do manage to stomach it, or because it seems to give them success. But God does care that we know the truth he makes plain to us. He cares that we understand the consequences of turning a blind eye to his standards of righteous thought and behavior. The study of what knowledge is, how we know, and how our knowledge relates to what is real is called epistemology. Episteme is Greek for knowledge. What we believe about knowledge itself serves as a kind of greenhouse in which we nurture our ideas and transplant them into every area of life. Although it may not be possible to know everything, surely it is possible to know something. Yet some disagree with even this, claiming that we can't know anything outside of our own personal reality and must instead get in touch with consciousness, our higher selves. Trying to search for knowledge outside ourselves wilts our true potential. New spiritualist writer Shakti Gawain believes that when we consistently suppress and distrust our intuitive knowingness, looking instead for external authority, validation, and approval from others, we give our personal power away. The idea that truth and morality depend on our personal or cultural situation is called relativism. If relativism is correct, one of the main goals in life should be to remove any barriers people might face in finding truth for themselves. But isn't this dangerous? Even Paul Kurtz, an atheist philosopher who helped develop Even Paul Kurtz, an atheist philosopher who helped develop a philosophy called secular humanism, acknowledged that it can be, and this is what he said, the humanist, okay, that was just a really bad sentence. What did he acknowledge that it can be? Oh, it's dangerous. And he said it this way. Okay, I got the sentence now. The humanist is faced with a crucial ethical problem. Insofar as he has defended the ethics of freedom, can he develop a basis for moral responsibility, regretfully merely to liberate individuals from authoritarian social institutions, whether church or state, is no guarantee that they will be aware of their moral responsibility to others. The contrary is often the case. Any number of social institutions regulate conduct by some means of norms and rules, and sanctions are imposed for enforcing them. Once these sanctions are ignored, we may end up with a man concerned with his own personal lust for pleasure, ambition, and power, and impervious to moral constraints. That's a lot of words. Just stick with me here, okay? Kurtz understands that unless, and here's the explanation, that unless there is some revealed moral truth we are obligated to obey, anything can be construed as good or bad relative to the situation in which we find ourselves. Even though we strive to do the right thing, if there is no absolute standard by which to judge, then we may honestly disagree among ourselves what the right thing is. So, if there are no absolute standards, how do we decide who is right and wrong when it comes to making societal decisions? According to Corliss Lamont, who donated the proceeds of his father's business fortune to build a library at Harvard University, and in turn was able to serve as Harvard's humanist chaplain, the answer is easy: intelligence. For the humanist, Lamont said, stupidity is just as great a sin as selfishness, and the moral obligation to be intelligent ranks always among the highest of duties. The implication of this statement is that only intelligent people are capable of making correct moral choices, leading to the assumption that intelligent people are to act as the moral compass for the rest of society. The smartest people should be in charge, and the rest of us must follow. But surely some intelligent people are evil, right? Should we believe what they know just because they're smart? There must be a better way. Christianity may have an answer, but it leads to a whole lot of other questions. Section 7, is it truly godly to seek knowledge? The Bible calls on Christians to have their minds and hearts renewed to discern right from wrong and good from evil, and to be renewed in the spirit of their minds. But for some Christians, this mission is at odds with what they wrongly understand Christianity to be. Some say it is a waste of time and even sinful to talk about non-Christian ideas. We should just study the truth, they say. Many even quote the passage, "Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men." That's from 1 Corinthians 1. Closely read what the passage actually says. It doesn't say that philosophy or scholarship or debating is bad. It says that approaching life from a worldview not centered in God is a foolish thing to do. Studying is not bad. Being taken captive by false ideas is. The Bible is full of examples of people who understood the truth from God's perspective and were better thinkers and leaders as a result. Daniel, for example, was even considered by a pagan king to be the wisest of men because his heart and mind were completely committed to God. Similarly, some think Colossians 2:8 prohibits Christians from the study of philosophy when it says, "See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ." Have philosophers deceived people? Certainly. But it does not follow that philosophy itself is deceptive and should not be studied. Rather, we should be wary of any idea based on human wisdom rather than Christ. Christian philosophers, then, must work hard to operate from a knowledge of Christ and a desire to serve their neighbors, helping them find release from their own captivity of heart and mind. This leads us back to the idea of knowledge. To know something about a subject means to be acquainted with the facts and truths surrounding it. A close examination of Scripture shows that God cares very much about knowledge. In Psalm 19, he says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words whose voice is not heard. Their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world." From Proverbs, "For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding." An intelligent heart acquires knowledge, and the ear of the wise seeks knowledge. Then in Hosea, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." And finally Philippians, "And it is my prayer that your love may abound more and more with knowledge and all discernment." So God does care about what we know. But does it really matter whether we understand the times and know what we ought to do? Can we even claim to know what people ought to do? Section 8. If knowledge is important to God, why isn't it important to Christians? Many people believe that Christianity can't contribute to the world's body of knowledge. A professor once told me, "You believe what you believe because you have faith. I believe what I believe because I have the facts." Ouch. Was my professor's assessment correct? Nancy Pearcey is a professor and author who has studied the Christian worldview for decades. She says that the confusion over what we can know stems from an uncertainty about upper versus lower story truth. The problem, Pearcey says, is we have created an artificial separation between fact, something that you can demonstrate as true, and value, that's something that you hold as important. She explains the idea as it was described by her mentor, Francis Schaeffer. Using the metaphor of a building, Schaeffer warned that truth had been split into two stories. The lower story consists of scientific facts, which are held to be empirically testable and universally valid. The upper story includes things like morality, theology, and aesthetics, which are now regarded as subjective and culturally relative. Essentially, the upper story became a convenient dumping ground for anything that an empiricist worldview did not recognize as real. Schaeffer used a simple graphic, which we can adapt like this, and this is in your book, obviously. You have values on top and facts on the bottom. This dichotomy has grown so pervasive that most people do not even realize they hold it. In Pearcey's mind, people have come to accept this fact-value split and don't question it anymore, even though it pushes Christian thought to the fringes of society. Pearcey isn't the only one who has noticed this. J.P. Moreland, a respected philosopher and evangelical Christian, says, "There has emerged a secular, sacred separation in our understanding of the Christian life, with the result that Christian teaching and practice are privatized and placed in a separate compartment from the public, or so-called secular activities of life. The withdrawal of the corporate body of Christ from the public sphere of ideas is mirrored by our understanding of what is required to produce an individual disciple. Religion has become personal, private, and too often simply a matter of how I feel about things. By contrast, the culture encourages me to invoke my intellect in my secular public life. By way of example, I'm always encouraged to use my intellect in how I approach my vocation, select a house, or learn to use a computer. But within the sphere of my private spiritual life of faith, it is my heart and my heart alone that operates. The life of the mind is thus separated, broken off, and compartmentalized as a function of the secular life, instead of more naturally being integrated with the spiritual. As a result, Sunday school classes, discipleship materials, and sermons too often address the heart and not the head, or focus on personal growth and piety and not on cultivating an intellectual love for God in my vocation. Clearly, both Pearcey and Moreland think it is incorrect to separate the world into secular and sacred, into facts and values. The only way to overcome this artificial separation is to recover Christianity as a knowledge tradition. To do that, we have to believe that God is actually real and has authority, as opposed to being just a figment of our imagination. As it turns out, this question of authority is one of the trickiest questions of our day. And that's section 9. What does it mean to have authority? Okay, you guys are doing really good. We have to go all the way to section 16, only in the first chapter. So, who has authority? Too often we think we do. It's common to hear, "I don't think God would send anyone to hell," or "I would never worship a God who didn't allow people in love to get married." In these cases, the speaker claims authority on behalf of or over God. Is this legitimate? To answer this question, we need to understand what authority is all about in the first place. Consider two definitions of the word authority from the concise Oxford Dictionary. Definition 1 is the power or right to give orders, make decisions, and enforce obedience. Definition 2, which is the power to influence others, especially because of one's commanding manner or one's recognized knowledge about something. Let's call the first definition hard authority, and let's call the second soft authority. Let's take a look at each in turn. Hard authority is the power to give orders and enforce obedience. In the military, the general has hard authority over the captain. If a captain disobeys the general's direct order, he or she can be court-martialed and imprisoned. On the road, a police officer has hard authority to enforce the speed limit and issue penalties for violations. Here are 3 characteristics of hard authority. It is extrinsic. It resides in the office rather than in the person. The off-duty police officer may not be allowed to issue tickets. An Army captain is no longer obligated to accept orders from a retired general. Hard authority is hierarchical. Both parties understand that one has standing over the other. Because I said so is a valid, though not necessarily winsome, argument when a general gives a command to a captain. Third, hard authority commands obedience because it is punitive. It has teeth. If you resist, there will be consequences. Soft authority, on the other hand, comes from the power of influence. People possess it because others respect who they are and what they know. Upon his retirement, the general in the example above may offer counsel but not orders to the military. A police officer may advise you on how to protect your home from burglars. A medical doctor may give you advice when you're sick. Soft authority then also has 3 identifying characteristics. It is intrinsic. It resides within the person. Others may be wise to follow it, but they are not compelled to do so. Soft authority is relational. A person who obeys it does so because the advice seems sound or because he or she trusts the source. And then soft authority persuades obedience rather than commands it. It is non-punitive. Those who resist may face consequences, but they aren't breaking the law. Unless you've joined the military or have agreed by contract to obey in certain ways, most of the authority in your life is probably soft authority. This is not to say there are no consequences for ignoring authority. In the situation of the military general or the off-duty police officer or the medical doctor, the law permits you to ignore the advice you've been given. Ignoring it may lead to a bungled military strategy or a higher risk of burglary or a longer duration of staying sick, even though you won't go to jail as a result. Even so, the categories of hard and soft authority overlap more than you might think. If you take a stand for a certain political position, your college professor might grade you down. Sometimes people are denied job promotions because they refuse to commit unethical acts. Sometimes Christian actors are denied parts in movies because they refuse to use vulgar language or perform nude. As we will see in later chapters, Christianity is based on the authority of God, as revealed both generally in nature and specifically in the Bible. Following Christ will lead to a life of peace with God that is not contingent upon your circumstances, and one day, according to the Bible, Jesus will return as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. On that day, he will render judgment, bestow rewards, and punish evil. God's authority is both hard and soft, extrinsic and intrinsic, obligatory and persuasive, hierarchical and relational. Section 10. Why should we submit to God's authority? Obviously, submitting to God's authority is a weighty matter. Some people have no problem doing it. Others intellectually know they should obey God, but struggle to do so. Still others reject God's authority entirely. These different responses usually have something to do with a person's early experiences of authority. Our earliest experience with authority involves believing and obeying our parents, teachers, and pastors. At first, it doesn't even occur to us to doubt them. Over time, we gradually learn that they are not expert authorities on everything. They are capable of being wrong. If we are rebellious, we might think this gives us the right to ignore them entirely. We no longer fear what they will do to us, so we no longer respond to their commands. Of course, in disobeying these authorities, we choose to obey someone else, usually our peers, or indirectly popular culture icons. We are selective, often unreasonably so, and refuse to respond to our parents because I said so, but may unquestioningly obey a rock star whose best argument is because I said so. Imagine a student we'll call Dalton. Dalton grows up in a strongly authoritarian or hard church and is so accustomed to being told because I said so that he stops questioning it. His problem isn't unanswered questions, but rather unquestioned answers. When Dalton arrives at his History of Civilizations class at college, the professor says that the Bible is filled with non-historical myths, a claim illustrated with apparently compelling examples. His own lectures, the professor promises, will strive to reflect the consensus of today's best scholars, regardless of where they lead. The professor is popular and cheerful, not mean or angry. He's funny in class, and to disagree with him is to appear grumpy and humorless. In fact, he is a genuinely nice person, at one point taking the time to help Dalton figure out a complex registration schedule when nobody else would. Compared to the rigid voices from Dalton's past, the professor is very appealing. How should Dalton reconcile the authority of his church and the authority of his professor? We evaluate authorities all the time. Should we believe the politician who tells us what we want to hear? Should we believe the weather person's forecast? Should we believe the friend who says, you have to see this movie? Sometimes we believe what others say because we lack good reason not to. Plus, if we had to try to evaluate every claim, for example, asking 3 people instead of 1 what time it is, we would end up in gridlock. If I ask someone for directions, I don't know if the person is honest, sane, or knowledgeable, but my life experience tells me that people don't usually tell pointless lies to strangers. Similarly, if my history teacher says George Washington died December 14, 1799, or that John F. Kennedy was born May 29, 1917, I have no reason to doubt her. Evaluating authority is much harder if we're filled with doubt. If you've ever engaged in online debates about faith, you know that many people are conspiracy theorists. Your priest was deceiving you. It's a conspiracy to keep the church in power. You were lied to by your parents. It's a conspiracy to keep you from enjoying life. Can you prove there is no conspiracy to deceive you? Probably not. But just because a skeptic or a cynic raises questions does not mean his doubts should be considered authoritative. Instead, we should gather reliable sources or authorities and life experiences, think and pray about them carefully, and then act on them. Most people who have considered the claims of Christianity have doubts about those claims. How do I know that the Bible is true? If something is in the Bible, do I have to obey it? What does the Bible itself say about obeying authorities? Am I obligated to follow the Bible even if those who say they believe it are following it poorly? These are important questions, but in themselves, they are not a strong basis for doubt. If the balance of evidence shows Christianity to be authoritative, it would be unreasonable to reject it. For those who confess Christianity, affirming that Jesus is Lord, Jesus' view of the world must become their view of the world. That leads us to section 11, but isn't Christianity based on faith, not knowledge? At this point, we're getting tired of reading, I know, but we're almost to the end. Anyway, at this point, both believers and non-believers might have objections. Believers might say, you're missing the point of Christianity. It isn't about facts, it's about faith. Non-believers could readily agree. You Christians believe by faith. We non-Christians believe facts. Stop trying to tell us what to do. Stephen Pinker, a professor at Harvard University, defines faith as believing something without good reason to do so. But this is far too simplistic, if not downright misleading. That's almost like saying it's wrong. Certainly, biblical faith is a gift of God, and it involves trusting that God is who he says he is and will do all that he has promised to do. But biblical faith is based on knowledge, not blind obedience. In Colossians 1, 9 and 10, the Apostle Paul says, "And so, from the day we heard, we have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God." The more we know, the better able we are to walk by faith. Biblical faith is not blind. As we will see, the Bible is unique among books because it includes so many specific details that can be observed to be true or not true. It practically invites scrutiny. The apostles were confident, not that their faith would be interesting to others, but that it would be seen to be factual. In 1 Corinthians 15:19, the Apostle Paul tells his readers, in essence, you can check out the evidence for the resurrection of Christ for yourself. You'll see that it actually happened. And if it didn't happen, everything else I'm telling you is false. Maybe it was based on the Apostle Peter's own occasional doubting that he encouraged his readers to be prepared to give good reasons for the hope they placed in Christ. What makes faith valid is not that we have it, but that the object of our belief is actually worthy of belief. Theologian David Clark says, faith derives its value not from the intensity of the believer, but from the genuineness of the one she believes in. True faith is faith in the right object. Faith in an unfaithful person is worthless or worse. It is not enough to be sincere in our belief. We can sincerely believe that our parachutes will deploy as we jump out of a plane over Central Park, but all the sincerity in the world won't help if the parachutes turn out to be ordinary backpacks. So what do we do with doubt then? All of us experience doubt because all of us are limited in our knowledge. We have questions for which we have not gotten satisfactory answers. But doubt can actually be a healthy part of a Christ-centered, thoughtful life. Here's how Pastor Tim Keller says it. A faith without some doubts is like a human body without any antibodies in it. People who blithely go through life, too busy or indifferent to ask hard questions about why they believe as they do, will find themselves defenseless against either the experience of tragedy or the probing questions of a smart skeptic. A person's faith can collapse almost overnight if she has failed over the years to listen patiently to her own doubts, which should only be discarded after long reflection. Dealing with doubt is part of what it means to mature in the faith. It takes courage to doubt, but here's a hugely important key. Rather than just give up, you should be specific about what bothers you, and you should gather the will to look for answers. Learn to doubt your doubts so they will not overpower everything else in your life. Section 12, Coming of Age in the World of Ideas. Why this book is important. Maybe it would be helpful if I illustrated this with some of my own story. Not my name, you know that. His name is Jeff Myers. He grew up in a small town where everyone I knew was either Protestant or Catholic, or lapsed from one of the two. Other than by the one classmate who was a Jehovah's Witness, I was never confronted with other faiths in my town. Sounds like my town. I didn't even meet a Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or true atheist until I went to college. Same. There, however, my world expanded and the choices stopped being simple. Growing up, I never imagined that I might be a scholar, mostly because I could barely understand what was going on in class. Even in elementary school, my teacher's instructions didn't make sense to me, leading to poor grades and a lot of running laps in gym class. I could feel my heart pounding when they issued instructions because I knew I would forget or misunderstand them. My greatest fear was that I would not understand what people wanted from me, that I would be punished either by them or by life as a result. I did love to read though, and even in the middle of the school day, I would find myself tuning out the teacher and reading a book about whatever I was interested in at the time. I didn't necessarily learn what my teachers wanted me to learn, but I did enjoy learning about the topics I found interesting, such as philosophy and history. Unfortunately, the more I learned about philosophy and history, the more at odds I felt with the faith of my parents. Our family attended a small conservative church. I remember one day the pastor gave a sermon on why women should wear dresses and not slacks or jeans. Why was this kind-hearted, well-meaning pastor taking so much time to answer questions like this, which were of no concern to my classmates and me, and ignoring such questions as, why does a good God allow pain and suffering? Fortunately, just after I graduated from high school, my father arranged for me to attend a 2-week program in Colorado sponsored by the organization I now lead, Summit Ministries. Summit has been around for a long time, more than 50 years, and was started by David Noble, say it how you want to, and other instructors helped me acquire answers to my typical questions about God, the world, and life's purpose. It changed my life and led me into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. One of the most important gifts I received from Noble was a mental model of worldviews. From this, he showed how the Christian worldview is more in tune with the way the world actually is than any other worldview we study. Summit gave me a vision for leadership. Noble was the first to show me the reference to the tribe of Issachar from First Chronicles 12:32, who had an understanding of the times and would know what Israel ought to do. Notice the connection. Because the men of this tiny tribe understood the times, they knew how to lead Israel. Learning this made me want to focus my life on understanding the times so I could make a difference. Today I have the privilege of heading up that same ministry. Our mission hasn't changed: to cultivate young leaders to transform culture with a biblical worldview. Our headquarters is in a collection of Victorian buildings in Manitou Springs, Colorado, a little town the New York Times has described as a hippie Mayberry. I live there with my family. I went to school nearby at the University of Denver, where I had some great professors and earned a doctorate of philosophy in human communication studies. Summit Ministries continues the wonderful tradition of cultivating rising generations to know the truth and to lead. Its instructors are world-class experts committed to living godly lives, communicating vibrantly, dialoguing, and mentoring others. They don't desire to impress people with how smart they are, but rather want to prepare purposeful, resolute, articulate, and compassionate champions of the Christian worldview. Simply put, Summit helps high school and college students learn what they need to know in order to become our nation's most trusted leaders. They want you to be our nation's most trusted leader. My goal for you is, first, that you will be a more thoughtful person when it comes to understanding the ideas that rule our world. But more than that, I want you to experience confidence in God and the Bible, such that you are motivated to be a courageous, articulate, compassionate, completely sold-out follower of Jesus Christ, who applies your faith to every area of life. Section 13. Introduction to the book series. There are 3 books in this series, which is called Understanding the Times. There's Understanding the Faith, that's what you're going through. I'm skipping to the next paragraph. There's Understanding the Times, which is a survey of competing worldviews. And then there is Understanding the Culture, which is a survey of social challenges. For most people, this series of books will serve as a clear, comprehensive, and compelling case for Christianity, which is good in and of itself. But if you're the kind of person who craves a sense of purpose, who longs for a noble cause, who has sensed that most people move through their lives unaware, then this series will mean so much more. It will be an essential part of your journey to becoming a champion for truth. The search for truth is not one we should fear. As Thomas Jefferson said, truth is great and will prevail if left to herself, that she is the proper and sufficient antagonist to error and has nothing to fear from the conflict, unless by human interposition disarmed of her natural weapons, free argument and debate. We're going to have plenty of debate and discussion, We approach each question honestly, deal with the doubts many experience while courageously doubting those doubts, and always move toward the truth. Section 14. Understanding the faith so we can understand the times. By picking up this book and deciding to study it, you join in a long line of tens of thousands of leaders in business, politics, medicine, science, ministry, the arts, and dozens of other cultural channels of influence who have committed to knowing the facts and truth about Christianity. Their beliefs have become stronger, their values deeper, their convictions more firm, and their actions more likely to take them in the direction they should go. At Summit, we've uncovered some convincing findings about why all this matters. Today's Christian young adults are unprepared for opposition. Only 1 out of 6 students understands the worldviews that set themselves up against the knowledge of God. Today's Christian young adults cannot mount a defense. Although more than 2 out of 3 students are confident that the Christian worldview is true, only 1 in 5 feels prepared to defend it as such. Today's Christian young adults are failing at spiritual disciplines. Only 1 in 3 student claims to have a strong devotional or prayer life. Today's Christian young adults feel alienated from God. Imagine a youth group meeting at church. Only 1 in 2 students assembled there actually feels close to God. Understanding the faith makes a big difference. An in-depth study of 1,591 students who studied with Summit showed a dramatic positive influence on their level of Christian commitment, feeling of closeness to God, devotional life, prayer life, church attendance, sharing of faith, understanding of a Christian worldview, understanding of other worldviews, confidence in the truth of a Christian worldview, ability to explain the beliefs, and ability to defend those beliefs when challenged. In fact, the average respondent says he or she is 85% better prepared, almost twice as prepared for higher education. This is great news for a struggling generation. Of today's young people in America, ages 12 to 22, only 1 in 5 possess a sense of purpose in life, while 25% are at risk of not achieving productive adulthood. Young Christians are disengaging from their faith, embracing instead what sociologist Christian Smith calls liberal whateverism. Yet fully 60% say they want to make a difference. They just need guidance. Let's get ready to embark on a journey through the world of ideas. At points it may be rough going, but don't give up. Some things might not make sense at first. You might realize flaws in your thinking or disagree with what you read. I'm fine with that as long as you're motivated to do something. C.S. Lewis observed, if you are on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road. And in that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive man. The study of ideas isn't just to find out what works for me. It's about expressing the truth publicly and persuasively. It's about leadership. Almost there. Section 15, for such a time as this. For most of my life, I wished I lived in a Lord of the Rings moment, an age of defining battles and a clear difference between good and evil. Our world might not seem so clearly divided, but we do live in an epic time. What we do now will affect the world for hundreds of years, for evil as well as for good. In a world of change, small things often become great in consequence. Karl Marx, notorious founder of the world's most bloody and miserable worldview, did most of his work alone in a quiet library. When Marx died, only a handful attended his funeral, and still, as pastor and theologian Dave Breeze memorably phrased it, his ideas rule the world from the grave. The battle of our time isn't just a battle for territory or power, it's a battle for truth. It is your destiny to battle for truth against lies, for justice against injustice, and for good against evil. This is no accident in God's sovereign plan. It is time for us to be brave and stand up. C.S. Lewis said that Christians are tempted to make unnecessary concessions to those outside the faith. We give in too much, he said. We must show our Christian colors if we are to be true to Jesus Christ. We cannot remain silent and concede everything away. Of course, the need to understand the times as Christians does not mean we know everything. I have to confess my greatest fear in writing this book is that if people read it and disagree with any given point, the dialogue between us will break down. Too often Christians succumb to what political theorist and historian Russell Kirk called the excommunication temptation, a belief that we all must agree on everything or else there is no truth, and that those who disagree with me must be shunned. What we're shooting for in this book is not that, but what C.S. Lewis called mere Christianity, agreement on the non-negotiable basics of the faith, while exercising charity in the areas where we disagree. For my part, I'll try to outline my assumptions and thinking as clearly as possible, as well as what I understand to be the biblical basics. I encourage you too, as you read, think about how we can move forward together even where we disagree. Several millennia ago, a young Jewish woman named Esther was pushed into marrying King Xerxes, one of the cruelest and most pompous kings of ancient history. Sometime afterward, Esther's uncle Mordecai uncovered a plot hatched by one of the king's trusted advisors to massacre the Jewish people. Mordecai urged Esther to intercede with the king. She informed him that the king, in his paranoia, would have killed anyone who came into his presence without invitation, including, presumably, his own queen. But Mordecai pressed her to act by saying, "Who knows but that you have come to a royal position for such a time as this?" Perhaps we too have come to a royal position for such a time as this. Last section, the conclusion. We'll get started in the next chapter by examining what the Bible is and isn't. This is sure to be controversial. The Bible has been the most influential book in the history of the world, and it's not because, as some would claim, it is a love story from God, an instruction manual for life, a book of do's and don'ts, or even a book about admirable heroes. It is something much, much more. Interestingly, some famous skeptics and atheists have understood this even better than many Christians. So get ready to think hard, because the following chapters will engage you at the intellectual level. More than that, though, be ready to wonder. This book will engage you at the level of imagination as well. Life is an art, not a science. If God is real and the Bible is authoritative, then truth is real, and there is a sure way in which we should walk. We should be prepared to follow it. You made it. Woohoo!